If you know or even think that you might not get your taxes filed by the deadline of Monday, April 18th, 2023, then you absolutely need to request a tax filing extension to avoid getting fined by the IRS. I'm Bradford with the Penny Pinch Guide to Personal Finance, and over the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through everything you need to know about requesting a tax filing extension, as well as how to use IRS Form 4868, which is how you're going to do it. So here we have IRS Form 4868, which is the application for your automatic extension of your tax filing deadline. Now, how you're actually going to go about doing it is going to come down to one of three options. Now, the first one here is that you can either pay all or part of your estimated income tax due and say that you're requesting an extension doing that, and then you will automatically receive the extension without having to file this form itself. Now, it's not going to be applicable to most people because most people are W-2 employees. Their employers withholding their income tax on their behalf, and they're never having to do those quarterly estimated tax payments, which is something that those that are self-employed have to do instead. So if you are self-employed, you do some sort of contract work, this is going to be an option available to you to automatically get that tax filing extension. Now, the next two options both rely on Form 4868. The second option is doing some sort of e-filing method, whether that's through some sort of tax preparation software, using the IRS.gov's free fillable forms, or something along those lines. And then the third option is again using the 4868, but instead you're filing it using a paper format and you're sending it through the mail. And then you can see on the right-hand side here, it talks through how you can actually do that, reiterating these steps 1, 2, and 3, whether it's you're paying electronically, you're e-filing, or you're filing a paper form 4868. Now, continuing down here onto the general instructions. So it outlines what the purpose of this form is, and it's how you can get an automatic extension of 6 months past whatever the regular filing deadline is. Now, that 6 months is only going to be applicable to people that live in the United States. Now, if you are a US citizen paying US income taxes, but you live outside the United States, you are going to automatically receive a 2-month extension anyway. And by filing this form, it's going to extend you 4 months for a grand total of 6 months, which is what you would get if you lived in the United States the entire tax period. Now, the next section on this form here, it talks about what do you have to do to be able to qualify for the extension in the first place. Now, there's 3 steps here. It's 1, you need to properly estimate your 2022 tax liability using the information available to you. Now, that would be through using IRS Form 1040 as well as the accompanying general instructions to calculate what your estimated taxes would be for the previous tax year. Now, 2 on here is you're going to enter your total tax liability on line 4 of this form. And then 3, you need to file Form 4868 by the regular due date of your return. So you cannot request an extension after the taxes are already due. You need to file this form before the standard tax deadline, which again is April 18th, 2023 for filing for tax year 2022. Now, a really important piece of information to note, which I have highlighted in red here, is that Form 4868 does not extend the time to pay your taxes. If you don't pay the amount due by the regular due date, you are going to owe interest. Now, a lot of people actually receive a refund, so this isn't going to be an issue. But if you do think that you are going to actually owe money, you're going to have to send the IRS a check because you didn't withhold enough or you didn't pay enough on your quarterly estimated taxes. You still need to send that money to the IRS, regardless of however long you are going to wait to actually file your taxes themselves, or you will be penalized. And I'll go more into the 3 different types of penalization that you can experience later on this form. And then moving on is you don't need to have any sort of reason as to why you're requesting this extension. You could just request this extension every single year if you want. The only reason that you would ever have to provide a reason is if the IRS for some reason does deny your request, then you have to move forward in conversations with the IRS to get that extension approved. And in that instance, you would probably have to provide some sort of reason that you are actually requesting this extension in the first place. And now moving on to the actual part of filling out this form, it's very straightforward. You're going to come in here. This first part for calendar year 2022, the only reason why you would be putting something in this block, or this block is if you use a fiscal year that is different from the calendar year. Now, for most people, they're just going to be filing taxes based on January 1st through December 31st. So you're going to leave this section blank. Now, if you run a business and use a fiscal year that is different than the calendar year, that is why you'd be using this section right here. Then the next part is very self-explanatory. What is your name? Where do you live? City, state, zip code, your social security number, as well as your spouse's social security number. Then getting into line 4, this is going to be the estimate of your total tax liability for 2022. If you have any questions about how you can actually do that, there's a bunch of different tax preparation softwares that you can use for free. Free Tax USA comes to mind, or you can go through the process and do it yourself by using IRS Form 1040. And I have recommendations down in the description below, depending on which route you want to take. Now, line 5, it's going to be your total 2022 payments. If If you're a W-2 employee, this is going to be where you're looking at your W-2 and seeing how much money has already been withheld. If you're self-employed, you do contract work, this is going to be where you're referencing your quarterly estimated tax payments that you've made throughout the previous tax year, and you're going to enter that information in here. 6, balance due, so just figuring out how much you owe and how much you have already paid, figure out the difference. And this is going to be whether you actually owe money to the IRS or whether they owe you a refund. So if it's balance due, how much money you actually owe, that's going to be a positive number. If a refund is due to you, there will be a negative number. And the amount you're paying. So when you send this in, you can actually accompany a check that is how much money you expect to actually pay to make sure you're not getting penalized by paying your taxes late. 8, you're going to check here if you're out of the country, and we're going to go over what the criteria is for that in a minute. And then 9 is check here if you file a Form 1040-NR and didn't receive wages as an employee subject to the U.S. income tax withholding. Now with the actual section of the 4868 filled out, let's go over and cover some important things that you need to consider when you are sending this form in. Now, the first part is that you do have to have this form submitted by the regular tax filing deadline, again, which is April 18th, 2023 for tax year 2022. Now, the next section is it goes over who is considered to be a U.S. taxpayer that is out of the country that will automatically receive that 2-month extension. And then if you do submit this form, you're going to get that additional 4 months for a total of 6 months past the regular tax filing deadline. Now, something to note here is that even though you're receiving that automatic 2 months of an extension, you still have to pay your taxes on time or you will be charged interest for paying them late. Now, coming down here is it talks about the regular extension if you live outside of the United States is your tax filing deadline is going to be June 15th. And then the next thing you need to consider is here are the requirements if you do live outside the United States and whether or not the IRS considers you to be living in the United States versus out. The first one here is if you live outside the United States and Puerto Rico and your main place of work is outside of the United States. And the next one is that if you're in the military living outside the United States because you're stationed overseas. And now note that if you qualify for either of these things, even if you are back in the United States during the regular tax filing season, but you meet either of those requirements, you are considered living outside of the United States for Form 4868's purposes. And then the next section talks about total time allowed, which I've already addressed, is a total up to 6 months. That means if you do file this form, you have until October 16th, 2023 to be able to file your taxes. Now, there are extensions you can get past that, but that's going to be on a case-by-case basis of you working with the IRS to get your specific situation figured out. And then it does address that when you actually file your tax return, you don't need to accompany it with your Form 4868 that you filed to get that extension in the first place. Now, scrolling back up here, these 3 sections that I've highlighted in red are the 3 types of penalties or fines that you can expect to see when it comes to filing your taxes or paying your taxes late. So the first one here is going to be interest. If you underpay your taxes, the IRS is going to charge you interest on the amount that you have not yet paid. And now moving on to the next one is going to be the late payment penalty. So if you pay your taxes late, you're going to be paying a penalty of 1/2 of 1% of any tax that is not paid by the regular due date of your return. The maximum penalty is 25%, which can be pretty steep. Let's say you owe $1,000. That means you could be paying an additional $250 by suffering this late payment penalty. Now, there are some exceptions here where you could be exempt from this penalty, and those are outlined here in 1 as well as 2. And then the late filing penalty, this one is especially hefty, and this is the entire reason why you are filing Form 4868 is to be exempt from this one. So this one is you would be paying a penalty of 5% of the amount that you owe to the IRS for that tax filing session, up to 25%, with a minimum penalty of $450. So this is a really solid reason why you want to make sure you're getting your Form 4868 on time before the tax filing deadline, again, which is Monday, April 18th, 2023 for tax year 2022. Now, as we continue down on here on this form, it's going to get into some specific instructions covering everything that I've already covered in this video. But if you do want to recap it, it goes through lines 1 through 9 on what to actually do to fill out this form. And then the next page is going to go over how to actually make the payment. You can make the payment on the taxes that you owe either electronically through the IRS's website. You can pay by check or money order. And then there is this one little note here is that you cannot send a check in of over $100 million. If you get to that section, you're probably not going to be listening to a YouTuber trying to figure out how to do your taxes. If you owe that much money, you're making that much revenue, please go talk to a CPA instead. And then the last part is if you do decide to actually submit your Form 4868 via snail mail with the US Postal Service, here's how you're actually going to send it in. You're gonna look on the left-hand side here. You're gonna see where you live. And then if you are making a payment with your Form 4868, you're gonna send your 4868 with the payment to the corresponding location. And then if you're not making a payment and you're just requesting the tax filing extension, it's gonna go to this location instead. And then there's a little bit of extra guidance if you're using a private delivery service like UPS, FedEx, DHL, what rules are going to apply to that specific situation. And once you get this form sent in, you don't have to worry about paying any sort of penalties for filing your taxes late, but you still have the issue of actually filing your taxes. So I'd highly recommend checking out Free Tax USA, which will allow you to file your federal taxes completely for free and then state taxes for just a nominal fee. Thanks for watching, and from your first penny to your first million, we're here to help.